In 2009, Hollywood produced the movie I'm sure all of you saw, Paul Blart, Mall Cop. During that movie, he was told to be a mall cop, and his job was to observe and report. And going forward, that is your job in the Second Amendment community. Let me tell you what that means when we get right back. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and I'm proud to say the top voice of the Second Amendment in America thanks to the 2025 Gundies Awards. Thank you again for your support. All right, folks, so I'm deputizing you to go out and observe and report. And what do I mean by that? Let me be very clear. This is not about excuses. I'm just telling you the reality on the ground and something that you can actually do something about. You see, the Trump officials, the Trump White House counsel's office, the high-level individuals that work at the Department of Justice for Donald Trump, Pam Bondi, and the others, are extremely busy with a lot of things. One of the things that's keeping them super busy, working all night long, are these crazy cases being brought to try to shut down Donald Trump, fixing the federal government, firing all these federal employees that don't do their job, or at least not efficiently, according to Doge, getting rid of these illegal aliens, deporting them back to places like El Salvador and Venezuela, stopping and getting rid of and reversing the effects of the invasion of our country, thanks to Joe Biden's open border policies. Now, the reason why I say this is, even though this Trump administration is already working hard on the Second Amendment in many respects, we don't need to go over that again. We've done it in other videos. I want to give you some reality on the ground. And this is not a new phenomenon, but I want to identify the phenomenon and tell you how you can help. And that is this. Many years ago, I was talking to a senior official at the National Rifle Association. This is long before all the controversies that we're aware of in recent years. And one of the things he told me a decade plus ago was that the NRA was very good at tracking legislation because they knew what was going on around the state houses, the U.S. Capitol, and so on. But the one thing they had problems tracking, because it was all localized, were court cases at the state, local level, criminal cases, civil lawsuits brought by people other than the NRA. And as a consequence, it was sometimes the case that lawsuits or legal proceedings would get all the way up to an appeal before the NRA's lawyers even knew it existed, before they had any idea that the Second Amendment had been posed as an issue in some case. So the lesson from that was that the NRA encouraged people to tell them about any court case that may have some implications to the Second Amendment and our right to keep and bear arms. Now, that advice and that guidance back then, 15 or more years ago, holds true today when it applies to the Trump administration. You see, the higher-ups in the Trump administration have been appointed by President Trump. They're going to try to do his bidding. They're going to try to advance the Trump agenda that was voted in November 2024. And one critical part of that agenda, undeniably so, is to protect and restore our right to keep and bear arms and to restore our Second Amendment to a place it never should have left. But the reality is, we in the Second Amendment community are going to have to work hard to bring things to their attention. Because you may recall a few weeks ago, I think this channel played a role in it. Down there in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, there was that decision 3-0 that said that suppressors and silencers were not arms under the text of the Second Amendment. And I immediately in this channel pointed out how ludicrous that conclusion was. That was the case of Peterson versus the United States. Mr. Peterson sought an immediate, he requested to the entire Fifth Circuit to have his case reheard en banc by the entire Fifth Circuit to overturn the three-judge panel that got it wrong on whether or not suppressors and silencers violate the Second Amendment, bans on them or regulations on them infringe upon the Second Amendment, which of course they do, and that silencers and suppressors are indeed arms, as a matter of Second Amendment text. And as you may recall, the Trump Department of Justice initially filed an opposition to the request for en banc review. And in that opposition, they specifically said that suppressors were not arms under the Second Amendment, and that the three-judge panel had gotten it right. That gave rise to an outpouring on X, on YouTube, this channel here, I believe, all pointed out the craziness of this Trump position. Now, I pointed out on this channel not to freak out. I said, don't freak out. The brief was submitted by, listen carefully, because this is going to be an important story that you're going to use going forward to advance our rights. I said, no, don't worry about it. The brief was filed on behalf of the Department of Justice by the acting United States Attorney for one of the districts in Louisiana. And I said, that's not going to count. The acting U.S. Attorney down there in Louisiana is not going to have a say in the Second Amendment policy of the Trump administration. And lo and behold, after people noticed what happened, the higher-ups in the Trump Department of Justice recognized what had happened, and they immediately filed a document in the Fifth Circuit that says, whoa. Fifth Circuit, don't do anything yet. We're reconsidering our position in light of Donald Trump's executive order on the Second Amendment. We may change our position. We may actually take a position different than what the acting U.S. Attorney from Louisiana did, which is that he argued suppressors were not arms. We may take a different position, as well they should. Now, the point of that story is this. The Trump administration senior officials, undeniably, I can't say this for certain, but I'm highly confident that the senior officials at the Department of Justice had no idea that the acting U.S. Attorney for Louisiana was putting in a brief that said the suppressors are not protected by the Second Amendment and that suppressors are not even arms under the text of the Second Amendment. That's my guess. They didn't know. When they found out about what happened, they basically indicated to the Circuit, pause, we may be changing our mind on this. Just wait. Now, the lesson there is this. I've seen this weekend several posts on X about different people that have been allegedly improperly imprisoned over the last several years for what appear to be malum prohibitum, victimless, nonviolent crimes associated with guns. Okay? I'm not surprised. That's the sort of thing the Biden administration would do. But we're not going to talk about that right now. All I'm going to say is this. I believe there's two lessons from what I'm seeing right now. The first lesson is, if you see anything out there that seems inconsistent with the right to keep and bear arms, that seems inconsistent with something I've said on this channel, or inconsistent with your understanding of the Second Amendment and court precedents, do what Paul Blart, Mall Cop, did in that 2009 Hollywood movie, to observe and report. You observe it, you report it to everyone in the Second Amendment community. You let all the Second Amendment groups know. You let the YouTubers know. You let the Second Amendment influencers know. You let everyone know about this situation. For example, there was this veteran, Tate Adamiak, I think I got his name right, who has allegedly he's in prison for World War II weapon parts kits. I don't know all the details, but he's in prison, and, some low-level line attorney for the Trump administration apparently tried to use the recent Bannerstock decision by the Supreme Court to argue that he should stay in prison. This is the sort of thing that's important that people flag for the entire Second Amendment community. Now, what is the ultimate result going to be? Here's what I think should happen. Okay? Donald Trump has already done an en masse pardon of the January 6th protesters. He's already did a big pardon of over 20, I believe, pro-life protesters, all of whom were imprisoned, sentenced by the Biden Department of Justice that obviously was hyper-partisan about how they litigated cases. Okay? That's my professional opinion. They were hyper-partisan and did not exercise good judgment as prosecutors. That's my opinion. I think they went overboard too much. They shouldn't have done it. It wasn't good lawyering, in my opinion. They just overdid it. Too much. There has to be a level of proportionality here if you're a prosecutor and you bring to bear the power of the federal government on top of people's heads. But that's just my view. We're not going to get into the details there. Beyond to say the following. We know that Donald Trump has already done en masse pardons for the 1-6 protesters and the pro-life movement. I have very little doubt, in my opinion, that the Trump administration would have an interest in doing a similar set of pardons for those people who've been put in prison for mala prohibitum, meaning nothing evil about what they did, victimless crimes, who don't pose any danger, no evidence of violence, okay, put in prison for some BS, nonviolent, victimless crime. I'm sure the Trump administration would be very interested in receiving a list. There's someone out there, I'm not the right person to compile the list, but someone out there is in the Second Amendment community, and to put together a list of all those individuals in the last 4 or 5 years that have been put in prison or convicted of these kinds of mala prohibitum, victimless crimes, for having the wrong device in their closet, for having a barrel that's too short, for having something that AOTF claims is a machine gun when it's not, in the reality of it, right? You know what I'm talking about. Someone should compile this list of all these individuals that have been, put in prison, convicted under federal law, and this list should be made, and they should make the rounds in the Second Amendment community, and then ultimately be brought to the attention of the political officials in the Department of Justice. Now, this is a list that's not going to go anywhere. My guess is if you give it to the Pardon Office of the Department of Justice. At least historically, I would say those are just, civil servants at DOJ. It's not going to go anywhere if you give it to them. You got to go to the political people, the political appointees at DOJ and ATF, White House counsel, White House Attorney General. You get the point. So that's my recommendation. So 2 things from this video. You have to understand that you have to observe and report, especially cases and situations that are not obvious. Because there is no way the senior officials at the Department of Justice and in the White House can track everything going on in America right now. They are too busy with all the nonsense, dealing with DOJ, the immigrations, cutting back on the government, kicking out illegal aliens, and so on. There's tons of court cases, and these judges harass them left and right. And that does not mean that they don't want to do something for the Second Amendment or that they won't. It just means that we in the Second Amendment community need to help them do their jobs. We need to pull this information together. We need to identify problems for them, recommend solutions, and then bring it to the people that count. That's what has to happen. That's what has to happen. Because a lot of what's going on here will be below the radar screen. A letter filed in some court of appeals, a letter filed in a district court is not going to get picked up as a general matter by the Department of Justice higher-ups. It's just like a routine action. But if you see it, and we see it, and the Second Amendment movement talks about it, and we let everyone know about it, that will get someone's attention higher up at the Trump administration. Just like I suspect what happened with that Peterson case dealing with suppressors in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. But again, someone's got to compile a list of who deserves pardons or commutations or clemency or whatever you want to call it. From what I talked about in the Second Amendment violations, gun crimes are really BS, mala prohibitum, victimless crimes. Somebody's got to compile that list, point out why these people aren't dangerous, why they are entitled to clemency, to mercy, so on, so on. At the same time, you all have to keep your eyes and ears open. If you see something, let everyone know about it. As they say, if you see something, say something. That applies for any violations of the Second Amendment or things that seem odd, especially actions taken by low-level Department of Justice officials like in U.S. Attorney's office, because those will not get the attention of senior officials in Washington, D.C. It's just going to be below their radar screen unless and until we in the Second Amendment community bring it to their attention. All right, folks, so there you have it today. I apologize for my voice after coming back from overseas. I caught a little bit of a cold, but we will carry on and fight the good fight nonetheless. So there you have it. Make sure you follow me on X at 4Boxes Diner. Don't forget to follow me and subscribe both to YouTube and Rumble. And I look forward to talking again real soon here at the 4Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.